All right, so we are now live on a Tuesday night. Thanks everyone for taking part. We are broadcasting on YouTube live to thousands of audience members. All right. So as of late, I've been thinking a lot about getting school back up and running as we knew it before the pandemic. And this includes field trips that serve to enrich, as well as career exposures and readiness, particularly as we continue to support our alums after high school. And so as such, today's mission moment is one of enrichment, career exposure, and gratitude. So we have a culinary arts club at our high school. The club is facilitated by our chemistry teacher, who's a spirit. It's a great experience for our kids. Kids are taught how to cook by a science teacher, so they learn about the science of cooking while also breaking bread with their friends, which is one of the realest things in my mind one can do, to cook a meal and then enjoy it as a group or team or family. So Sal's been involved in the Museum of Food and Drink for more than a few years now, I want to say 3 or 4 years, and our students recently visited, our students visited the museum I guess 3 or 4 years ago, back when it was in Williamsburg. And then this past week, our club visited MOFAD and its exhibit on African-American contributions to culinary arts and culture in America. And they did that this past Friday. So you see a glimpse of what kids were experiencing with their clipboards. A nerdy bunch, but they love cooking. But this is one of the first trips that we've taken in 2 years. So it's good to kind of get back in the mix and have kids experiencing things outside of school. So kids had a blast. They learned something about food and culture, and perhaps were more deeply exposed to a potential career pathway. I'll say a bit more later on in this meeting about career pathways, as it's really important for our students in being best positioned to lead fulfilling lives after graduation. And so I want to thank Sal for making the experience possible. And I'm eager to expand on our school offerings in this area in the coming years as we think about, real deal, formal career prep and readiness for our kids. So thank you, Sal, very much.
Hey, no problem. I love that stuff. So I'm all about it.
And so if you love it, and I know you all do, I've got a couple of things for you to sign up on over the coming month or two. I think the first one is like very much aligned. And so we have a career fair going on in just a few weeks. Eric Gonzalez, who's been leading the fair, founded the fair 5 or 6 years ago, is continuing with it. We've got about 20 to 25 participants now. We're looking to bump that up by another 10. You guys do really cool stuff when you're not hanging out with us. And so it'd be great to have you highlight that and talk about it with our kids. So that's the 25th. I will send you a note this evening about perhaps how to get involved in that. And it's just a fun time. You get to sit around and talk about your job with a bunch of kids who are really curious about it. So I fully encourage it and would love to have you back in our building taking part in it. So that's one. And then the second, and I mentioned this, I guess, last month, we do have a college signing day coming up on April 29th. And that is a new event for us. We haven't done this pre-COVID because we didn't have a college class experiencing that pre-COVID. And so we're going to make it big if we can. And so a couple of things here. We're looking for a space. I've spoken with a couple of board members about potential space, but maybe a space that would fit up to 200 or 300 people if we can swing that and get kids, families, perhaps both sites involved in that. And so that's the 29th. And so we're looking for space in addition to people just coming by and appreciating and taking part in the festivities. Obviously, there'll be a lot of proud kids there and present and excited. So all fun. And so we'd love for you to take part in that.
Hey, Josh, do you have any written language describing that by any chance?
That's a great question. And I will be sending that out this evening too, just after this meeting. And so, yeah.
Okay.
On the college fair stuff, yes. With regard to facility stuff, we'd have to talk offline about, what your needs would be in terms of.
No, I just wanted to ask a friend of mine, and I wanted to make sure I described the event correctly, and I just wasn't sure about the details and timing and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I think I'll get that to you so your friend can feel really good about perhaps offering up a space if it's available.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, and so that is tonight's mission moment.
Great, thank you. You want to jumping
Continue
ahead of
on.
school. There's a
Yeah.
lot in the head of school that I think is going to come up in the SLC. So
Mhm.
when we try to, yeah,
I'm going to hit on some points that we won't discuss during other aspects of the meeting. Give me 1 second, one more time. There it is. And let's share. And school leader report. Yeah, there are, I don't know, 6 or so points I want to just provide some additional updates on or context. And so you've got this in your inbox and you've got it now in front of you. I'll scroll around, but try not to make you dizzy with it. So I think first and foremost, let me get my notes. As I said in the intro, it continues to be just a busy time of year, particularly for school leaders, but for everyone, as we sort of like fly the ship in the present while also kind of building one for the coming year. And so lots going on with regard to recruitment of both kids and staff, agreement meetings. We're preparing for exams at the middle school this spring, and then at the high school, we're taking mock exams next week in preparation for exams in June. So busy time as we experience school, but it also feels really good to be experiencing school without some of the things that we were worried about in the fall and winter. So it feels good now that the weather's picking up. You'll see on page 1 of my school leader report 6 priority goals that I think are important for us to focus on as a senior leadership team and then full team over the coming 2 weeks. These are things that we have been focusing on over the course of the month. The first is just around like within teaching and learning, like continuing to be in rooms and continuing to develop our own skills as coaches and leaders in developing teachers' skills so that kids are getting their very best stuff each and every day. And so this is something we're doing now, as well as it's something we'll continue to do and get better at in preparation for next year and years to come. This needs to be our bread and butter. Second, I mentioned test preparation, and so I'll say a bit more about what we're doing at the middle school, but it's important for us right now to do really good, robust work with using data on what kids are showing they know, what skills they're showing they know right now, and perhaps where they're having issues, so we can then quickly remediate and support kids. And so we've got these very short-term data cycles going on in math and ELA at the middle school to prepare kids for the exams happening in April and in late March. Third, staff retention. We've talked about this and how competitive we see things are right now and anticipated they would be. And so for us, the goal is that 60% of our renewal agreements are consummated by the end of this month. That would be quicker than any other year in the past in which we've done this. With regard to hiring, just one concrete goal. We're looking to make at least 4 hires by the end of the month. A couple that we're now in contact with and actively interviewing. On the student recruitment end of things, we have our lottery coming up on April 1st. And so the goal is to have 300 6th grade applications in hand. We're doing well. I'll say a bit more about that as we get into the dashboard. And then also some backfilling in the 8th grade and perhaps a few in the 7th grade. Feel really good about high school right now. So that's a priority. And then finally, as we think about next year, getting ahead of the game and making sure that we're being strategic and intentional about the way in which we set things up so that we're off to the races and kids are experiencing really powerful things in our school each and every day, academically and beyond. And so 6 goals right now for the month of March. We hope to achieve them so that we can continue to build on them in the month of April and then May and June. So that's the focus. Are there any questions there before I move on to some other quick updates on things further on in this report? All right, so a couple of other things just to highlight. So moving down to headlines over the past month. So just an update for people with regard to safety. As you know, or as you may know, the sort of schools in New York City have gone to an optional mask policy. And so I think that's gone fairly well over the past few weeks for schools. Because of our relatively lower vaccination rate, 34% versus the city average of 52% among kids. And we surveyed families and staff. A majority of our families, about 75%, said, hey, let's continue with this requirement, at least in the near term. About 60% of our staff said the same thing. So we felt compelled to go with that interest. And so through the end of this month, right now, we are continuing with our mask policy. It's routine now, it's conditioned, it's just how we operate. So it's not a big deal, but it was just an extra precautionary measure. And we'll reevaluate things starting next week. But I anticipate, given where we are right now, us moving to an optional policy in April. We'll see. With regard to staffing, just a quick highlight. We do an annual teacher promotion application offering each year in January. We had 10 teachers opt in to applying for promotion. So we're now working through their applications and are excited to see many of these folks shine and continuing their good work at the school. So that's a good thing. So I just want to bring that to people's attention. And then finally, under other, we have conferences going on virtually at our middle school on Thursday and Friday of this week. They'll happen in April at our high school. Virtual just means we have more participation, and the quality is still pretty good with regard to back and forth and the communication that happens among students, families, and teachers. So maybe one of the technological advances of COVID is that we're able to engage with families much more effectively and seamlessly remotely than beforehand. So that means more communication. Are there any other questions or any questions people have about the other highlights or headlines that are offered here that maybe I didn't provide updates on? All right, so we're going to talk about much of what is on pages 3 and 4 here, so I'm not going to go into detail there. That includes, I'll say a bit about alumni success and where we are with things as of February during the SLC portion of the call. Moving down to STAR data, I do want to provide a bit there. I don't think we need to talk about it quite as much tonight during SLC, so I'll do it now. And I just say this, and Melissa, chime in if you want to add anything, if I miss anything, but over the past 2 board meetings, you've seen this data before. We provided updates on winter STAR assessments for the middle school and then the high school. So what we've done here in this report is just lumped everything together. So you get to see a sort of summary of grades 6 through 12, where we are from the fall to winter regarding growth in reading, in math, and then there's also some summaries on proficiency. And so I think just to highlight a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning here, with regard to growth, and I'm looking at this table here, our goal is for, on average, students to grow in the 60th percentile in math and reading. That bar represents the 60th percentile, and what you're seeing are, for students with no IEPs and students with IEPs in reading, what the average growth was per grade. So you'll see we're in the 50s for the most part with a little bit of variation and close to 60 in a number of cases. This is better than last year. And last year is the first time we used this data. So the growth this year is from fall to winter higher than it was last year. That's a good thing. And there's still work to do. We're not at 60, and that's where we feel we're at our best with regard to growing kids in a reasonable but accelerated form so that they're more ready for high school in this case, or college, in looking at the high school grades than otherwise. So that's our goal. That's where we are right now. And much of the same can be said about math. With regard to proficiency, go ahead, Jake.
Hey, Josh. First of all, sorry I'm late. Secondly, I guess, I think there's a good conversation around here. Can I, depending on how you feel about this and the fact that people have the slides, can I try to summarize the next 2 sections briefly? You can tell me if you think this is a good summary, and then maybe it'll give a little bit more time for us to talk through it.
Love it.
Because I thought we had a pretty good discussion with the SLC, and I think it's probably important for the board to hear too.
Yeah, I would love that, Jake.
So I'd say in my simplified version, the STAR testing, which is it's a program that we opted to, and that helps us assess progress, and it's on a computer, reactive, and probably more similar to the way our kids have been learning for the last sort of call it 2 years. Josh was just showing, but I'd say that the quick summary is we're doing reasonably well, not like excellent, but sort of making the progress for the most part that we're aiming to make for this period of time. The second set of scores are a mock exam, which is sort of more traditional exam, similar to what they'll experience at the state test, which is like an in-person exam, 2.5 hours, written, not on the computer. And there we performed way worse than, or our students performed way worse than what would be implied by the STAR exam. They don't exactly test the same things, but just sort of in gross, that's to me the takeaway, where we did not only, I guess, way worse than the STAR exam, but way worse than we did in the pre-COVID state exams, which was the last time we sort of tested this, the most similar type of environment.
Melissa, is there anything you add to that?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of benefits of the STAR exam as compared to our internal assessments. One, the STAR exam is an exam that's completely out of our control, but can be given multiple times to children and across time. And two, it is, both criterion and norm reference. We get to compare ourselves to other children. Our IAs that we do so that we can keep track on how kids might do, how they are doing, and make instructional decisions are internally run. So there are very few comparative points, especially as a small school. So STAR does some work that's really good work that we, just can't do entirely internally. And that in format and in breadth, or length really, the STAR exam, and I'd say breadth too, it's like in length, and then there's no writing on the STAR exam, not as similar to the state test that kids will take, but I can find the research. STAR does a pretty good job predicting of how students do. So taking these two and imagining we have multiple data points, and the reality probably lives somewhere in the middle of these data points, is a good way to think about processing the large amount of information we've gathered by this point in the year for students.
And just, I should add, I didn't mean to take anything away from the STAR exam. Like I'm fully supportive of the STAR. I think it's like a great interim assessment thing, and it'll get better over time as we've done it for more years. But just sort of it's probably less reflective of the state exam test.
Yeah.
But it's still a helpful tool for how are our kids learning on a sort of, how our teachers are doing, I should say, on a week to week, month to month basis.
I think that's right. And so why don't we do this? I think so. In sort of summarizing STAR, I think the idea here is we've got now good 6 through 12 data that we'll have 3 times a year to look at moving forward. We mainly use STAR to assess growth, but we do have it as a sort of additional proxy for proficiency. And over time, we'll be able to see sort of how STAR data proficiency wise aligns with mock related data, which then aligns with actual state test data. And we hope ultimately they all provide the same thing, because that then positions us to make the right moves information wise about which students are in really good standing with regard to their readiness levels and which students need more support.
And I shared in the chat for folks who like to read about school testing in their free time, some of the research about how aligned STAR is to state exams, and historically very aligned.
So I think with that, I wanted to mention, let's see if anything else. No, I think beyond STAR and the sort of sneak preview with regard to mock, we can move forward unless there are other questions people have for the monthly report. Again, we'll hit on each of these items throughout the meeting tonight in other areas. So I think we'll be in good fitting, well cared for. So I think with that, Jim, do you want to jump right? We'll jump right to the dashboard now. Does that make sense?
Yep, let's keep going. Yep.
Cool. So all right, so I'm going to share my screen once again. You have access to these files within the email I sent you yesterday, but there are a few different updates I want to provide here in the dashboard. And so I think first, let's look at student enrollment right now. I think the headlines here are we're at 517. We are down 3 this month versus the prior month. Overall, that means we're at 95% utilization across both sites, 90 at the middle school, 99 at the high school. The grades that are under enrolled are grades that have been under enrolled for most of the year. 7th grade, we've made a little bit of traction, but not much. And then 12th grade, where we really aren't backfilling at that grade at all. So no huge changes. The reason for a bit of a reduction is just we had a commuting issue where a student was commuting pretty far to school, and the parents decided to make a change. We had to move out of town. And then there was one case of a peer issue, and the parent felt it was best to have the child attend another school. So that's where we are enrollment wise. We're likely going to enroll at least 2 additional high school students in the coming weeks, and Chris is on that with a few others. So this isn't a concern, it's just the status of things right now. Beyond enrollment, unless there are questions before I move on, any questions about enrollment? All right, let's move on down to attendance. And I think attendance wise, a little bit of movement, but not really over the past month. We've got initiatives in place at both sites to boost attendance, particularly at the tier 3 level, where we've got a critical mass of students who are absent for more than 20% of the time. And so we've got, our social workers that work there along with other members of team to support families and kids there. So they're in school each and every day. I think some of this is just left over from just what we were experiencing in COVID, where kids are still getting back into school each and every day. And so that stamina, that muscle, that kind of just the routine is still being redeveloped. So that's where things stand now. As I said last month, we are looking at data, attendance data in this tiered fashion, which is kind of a new move for us, but I think it gives us richer data about which tiers of students we're making good progress in or maintaining high levels of attendance with, and where perhaps we need to buckle down. So that's where things are attendance wise at the school right now. Any questions there? All right, moving down to suspension data. Not a lot of movement from last month to this month. There may have been a couple of cases that resulted in the suspension, but I will just sort of say that we did have a physical altercation at our high school offsite. This was at a subway station last week, and there were 7 students involved in that. So these were only students who were physically involved in this from our school. This seems to have began with social media and perhaps some bad communication among students in our school, and then perhaps a few other people outside the school. So it's a concern for us. And so there have been some suspensions issued. I'm working with our deans and with others. We're meeting with families now to talk about sort of next steps and path forward. And so unfortunate, no serious injuries, luckily, but the transit police were involved in this, and it was just not good. So we're working through it. These sorts of things do take time, and so I'll have an update next month here. Are there any questions there? Cool. I think the last thing I'd say here is just what is often tricky. And it's a different world than maybe even it was 10 years ago. But when things happen offsite, we embrace it. We treat it as if it happened in school. And that may not be always the case in which other schools may kind of go about things. And so as a result, we often have our hands more full with working through and supporting these sorts of instances. And I think the rationale for us is just that, hey, if something goes on outside the school and then kids are back in school the next day, it's going to sort of impact culture and impact relationships and interactions. So better to sort of be more broad in intervening when there's negative instances in our community at large. moving on down to student recruitment. And so a couple of highlights here worth noting. So as I said, the lottery is about 3 weeks away. And the data here shows that we're doing some comparative work with where we were last year at this time to where we were now. And that just gives us a good benchmark. And so at the 6th grade, which is our big entry point as a school, we're up 41 applications this year as of today versus where we were last year at the same time. So that's good. So some good progress being made there. And we've got a team who are doing lots of research. As I said, 2 months ago, we sent a big mailing out to prospective families sharing information on the school, a bit of a small gift or token of hey, give us a look in the mail too. And we've got a team following up with that mailing by phone call and making connections. And so that's been kind of our big move in getting the attention of families to apply and give us a look and then make a decision after the lottery. And so, yeah, that's where we are with the 6th grade as of now. I mentioned earlier, we got 2 goals kicking around. I mentioned 300 earlier, and then 250 is what's listed in this table. So if we get between 250 and 300, we feel good about things, and we feel good about perhaps having the same number of students or perhaps even a bit more than we had last year. And we do have a healthy 6th grade this year, which feels great. So that's the present standing of recruitment. I will also say we're looking to backfill our present 7th grade, who will be in the 8th grade next year. And so we're doing some of the same things that we're doing with incoming 6th graders with a smaller mailing, gift, information about school, and then follow-up so that we can effectively backfill in that grade. So we've got a full 8th grade next year. Our other entry point is 9th grade. We've got a small cohort graduating this year, about just under 60 kids. And so that's how many seats we have available for the incoming 9th grade, just given our capacity, maybe a few more seats. And so we may only have 30 or so, 30 to 40 available seats for non-Unity 8th graders going into our 9th grade this year. And I think we'd love to have all of our 8th graders attending our high school. And so we'll see the way in which things turn out there. So that's the latest on recruitment. Are there questions there? All right, and then beyond that, so I'm moving down to table 10. I appreciate you guys always making time for these meetings on a Tuesday evening. Last meeting, I think we had 50% of our board attending, but because of announcing addresses and things, we couldn't count everyone. So we didn't make quorum last meeting. And so I guess just officially, thank you for making time. If you can get addresses out to Chris early enough so you can post them, you then count toward a quorum officially, and it's a good look. So that's the update there with participation. And I think that is all. No, one more. Going down to student participation and extracurriculars, quick update here. There's a lot going on. Again, we're back in school. So during the winter months, I want to provide a quick update on where we were participation-wise with kids doing stuff, doing school-related things beyond hours. For clubs, we've got a rather large contingency of kids taking part in our St. Nick's Alliance partnership program. And so kids are at school, I believe it's 4 days a week in which they're there till 5:30. And we've got, almost the majority of our kids doing that. At the high school, we've got clubs that we launched back in the late fall. About a third of our kids are taking part in those clubs. Culinary arts, I mentioned that earlier, being one of those clubs. And then with athletics, just in the winter months, things tend to be a bit smaller with regard to scope. And so we did have a critical mass of kids, 13%, 70% of kids taking part in different winter sports. And so overall, I just feel good about kids experiencing a full day and going home to their families after a full day and ready to get some rest. So that's the update there. With regard to SPED compliance, I do have numbers from one site. I'm waiting for the other site. I think we're in good form with regard to compliance related measures that we look at 3 times a year, but I'll have official numbers next month. And with that, that's the dashboard update. Are there any general questions that people have, or are there any tables that we didn't talk about tonight that folks would want to look at a bit more closely? All right, so back to you, Jim.
Any insight as to why the vaccination rate is so low versus the, the
Well,
broader
let's look at this.
community?
Yeah, let's look at this. So I think I don't have data in hand with what the vax rate is in the Bed-Stuy community and among the families we serve overall. I have only the vaccination rates for our students. And so you'll see our high school is a much higher vaccination rate. It's closer to the city average, with ninth grade being the highest at 52%. And this is confirmed or verified. It's possible these numbers might be a bit low. This is what we have. And then in the sixth grade, as you know, like kids didn't have access to vaccinations until later in the game. And so the 10%, I think, is a result of just that. And then things have seemingly become better health-wise. And so I think there's just less immediate motivation to get vaccinated if you haven't done so already.
Okay, and the refresh my memory, masks can come off, but we're going to keep them on for another 2 weeks. Is that the guidance right now?
Yeah, I mean, the official announcement to families was that we would keep masks on until the 31st, and we revisit late in the month and then offer an update. I think based on where things are right now, I could very easily see us kind of opting for the DOE policy of
And nothing, no like outbreaks among the staff or the students or anything like that.
I would say after counseling with Simon, Melissa, why don't you take this one? I was distracted.
Yeah, not recently. We've had a couple of isolated staff members, a couple of isolated students in the last couple months. December was an outbreak among staff, which is maybe another and students, which is maybe another reason folks were a little bit more reticent to take off masks and put in to ease off as soon, but nothing recently. So
you said
we had one
positive test. Yeah, but has anybody gotten really sick, or is it just a positive test and nothing? Okay, good.
Yeah,
that's good to hear. Okay, let's move on. Strategic planning.
Okay, and I think the move with strategic planning tonight is to talk a bit about the expansion grant. I'll provide a quick update now, and then we can dig into it further during executive session. So headline, and I think we talked about this during most of the committee meetings. So we applied for an expansion grant with the state of New York back in the fall. Felt like it was kind of a long shot, but thought that it wouldn't require so much time and it was worth engaging in. So Michelle did a good portion of that work along with Alex on the finance end. We submitted something in November and then found out in February that it was approved. The grant is for $900,000 and it's contingent on the Board of Regents giving the school the green light to expand and expand downward as we proposed in our application. So that's where things stand now. It's good to get some good news. I think going back in time, where we are now is that we did some initial sort of analysis on demand. We consulted with the Charter Center. We consulted with our authorizer, and now we have this grant in hand too. So we're sort of speaking with the right people. I think there are a few additional steps that we now take that, again, I can talk about. And I'd love to get some feedback on during the executive session tonight.
Okay, great. Okay, let's jump right into the committee reports. AFC.
All right. Is Alex in the mix tonight? Chris Tosher.
She is not, but give me 1 second. She sent me a video earlier. She's not feeling well tonight.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna bring up that video.
I'm envious, Jake. Looks good.
Sorry, I can turn my video off.
No, keep it on. I feel like we're breaking bread together. Like our
Do you have
America.
do you have smell-o-vision?
It's a good reminder that we're long overdue for an actual in-person meeting with some food.
You nailed it.
Cool. All right, you guys should you should see my screen. Audio is on. So Alex sent the video AFC update from earlier today.
Mhm.
Good evening. This is the presentation of the financials for the month ending January 31st, 2022. As you will see on our first page, our key performance indicators continue to be well within the acceptable range. Our total enrollment hasn't changed since the last report, but there have been changes within the special education classifications, which has reduced our enrollment variance by approximately $50,000. We will continue to report these changes monthly as we have our invoices. Don't have any specific comments on any of our balance sheet accounts. Our to-date net income continues to exceed our budgeted net income due to the recognition of the PPP loan and additional federal grant support. To date, we have recognized $457,000 in grant revenue and expenses through the end of January. Net income adjusted for that support is $395,000 compared to a budgeted net income of $946,000. Our cash requirements continue to be healthy through the end of this reporting period and well into the future months. This is largely due to the PPP loan that provided a substantial cash surplus last year. That concludes this very brief report out for the January financials. As always, if there are any specific questions, please feel free to email me and I'm happy to provide any level of detail.
Okay. I guess, Jeanette, would you add anything to what was discussed during Friday's AFC? The one thing I would add was just that we also began conversations with our benefits broker about kind of benefit plans for the coming year. And so there's some research going on. And so we should be able to provide an update in the coming month with what costs will look like and whether there are any significant changes.
Josh, the only thing I'll just restate, I said it on the call the other day, but I think, you know, clearly the things like the PPP, et cetera, skew results, and it doesn't present a true picture of what a real kind of operating run rate looks like. So if there's a way to carve those things out, even in a footnote, and say, without these extraordinary items, here's what we really look like on an operating level, you know, going forward, I think that would be helpful. And I understand that the PPP and other grants came in and we increased costs accordingly, so they kind of offset. So I don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but it's really hard to assess what your real run rate is when you have these extraordinary items, both in the expenses and the revenues, because 2 years from now they won't be there, and we need to know where we're, you know. I think we're probably going into the 5-year budgeting cycle pretty soon here. We could probably take care of it then.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, what we're looking at here operationally is we're down by about, I mean, the big difference here is so if you just sort of like stripped away any of the non-operational stuff related to kind of COVID on the revenue side of things, we're down enrollment wise by about 12 students. And so some of that arguably is COVID related. That's just differing. There's a different population, people have moved, et cetera, et cetera. And so from an operational standpoint, we're down about we're down $250,000. Our net income is negative 250 when kind of stripping away that federal funding. And I think our budgeted net income was $200,000. So that's the swing overall. I mean, that's kind of my back of the envelope general sense of where we are.
But I think the 5 year is the right way to look at this, because there's going to be a lot of other things at play here, especially going forward, because I think you're going to see salaries are way up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The state reimbursement hopefully will be up a bit. And there'll probably be a bunch of other costs moving around, both in terms of the trailers and the real estate. I don't know. I think if the 5 year is not soon, I think we should, accelerate it so that we go into this, if we know we've got some really big shortfall going into summer, we've got a few months to try to figure it out, rather than like have it find out in August and be like, oh shit.
Yeah.
We got a non-operating budget going into the school year.
And now that you mentioned that, I think just with the renewal application in August, we have to provide a 5 year budget. So we will do that.
So who's taking lead on that and owning the model and all that sort of stuff?
None other than Alex Poole.
Okay, so I should connect with Alex, because I have strong views on these things. So I better get those out there.
We have both versions of our budgetary files in the same form, just different tabs. And so I've tried to let her know.
This year we're doing one version only, my version.
We probably can do that. Yeah. I suppose we could do
only
that
one set of books.
Yeah.
One set of books. Yeah, no, but let's get going on that. That's a fairly arduous process. It's gotten a lot easier, but let's get going on it. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay.
Okay, DFC.
Let's see. DFC, we didn't meet formally. We traded emails, and we thought it would be best to perhaps discuss impact moves with the expansion grant. And again, so we'll do that during executive session.
Okay, ECPC.
Same. We talked a bit about partnerships. We talked about expansion grant, and so we assumed we'd talk more about that tonight. So nothing other than that to bring to the board tonight.
Okay, good. Let's jump to associate board.
SLC, we'll go back to that, I think, right?
Yeah, let's end up there, because I think there's a lot to do there. So let's clear out associate.
No one on the associate board is here tonight.
Okay.
No updates.
All right.
All right.
Let's dig in. SLC.
Right. So I think, let's see. I'll share my screen in one moment. All right, I'm going to start with the alumni work, and then we're going to move into mock exams. So we did not discuss, because we ran out of time, alumni related updates during the SLC. So this will be rather brief, but I think it's a good update. I want to talk a bit about kind of where things are with our first two cohorts, class of 2020 and class of 2021. And then communication we've had and kind of the standing based on that communication we've had of where kids are, and then give you a sense of where that is relative other schools from the data that we have, information that we have at hand. So what you'll see are a few different categories here. You'll see sort of what percentage of the cohort we're actively in communication with. And so you'll see that ranging from what you'll see here is November, and then an update as of February. So this is about 3 months out from the last report. And you'll see that for both cohorts. So across the board, we're in contact actively with about 75% of our founding class. So there has been a bit of a drop off since when they graduated from our school, but we are in touch with a vast majority, and have actually been in touch with more over the past 2 weeks with a few events. With the class of 2021, we're in touch with almost all of it, 96%. So we know sort of what's going on, and there's been contact with our alumni success counselor and those kids. So that's our universe. So for the kids who are not in contact with the class of 2020, we're assuming right now conservatively that like they're not enrolled in college, and we're unsure of what their whereabouts are with employment. And so we're not counting them in these last three categories. These last three categories are a part of the 75%, and for the class of 2021, a part of the 96%. So we've got 53 from our founding class. 53% of those kids who we're in contact with are enrolled in college right now. If you do the math, 75% of 53 is about 40%. So about 40% of our kids conservatively are enrolled in college. 15% of the kids we're in contact with are right now employed or in a job vocational training program. And right now we've confirmed that 7% of our kids are either not enrolled in college after being enrolled and or don't have, no, this is just a percentage of students who perhaps have withdrawn from college and haven't re-entered. And that's the class of 2020. With the class of 2021, same numbers, 81% of our kids are enrolled right now. 6% are involved in some job or job training, and then 1.5 have dropped out over the first semester or just beyond the first semester. And then 9% were kids who right now they're not enrolled, not employed. So they're sort of like searching, looking for things. So generally speaking, I'm going to jump down to the next slide and just give you a sense of kind of where things land in my mind. But are there any clarifying questions with this data as of now?
Just one one, which is just, is it fair to assume that the folks that we've lost touch with are less likely to be in college still, or less, like or is that a wrong type of projection?
I think just, we know our kids. We're talking about 84 kids from that class, and we've known many of them for many years. So I think in just looking at the list, we can kind of get a sense of like what they were thinking of doing in the spring of 2020 and perhaps what they're doing now. So it's just it's a conservative read. It doesn't mean that it's an accurate one. We may have some kids enrolled in college and they've just opted not to communicate with us because they're done with high school for whatever reason. I think ideally we'd like to be in contact with all of our kids, and we'd like to have really good information on what they're up to. And then if we can help, be helpful to them.
Okay, thanks.
So bright spots here, some things that I think are good. So first, you're seeing that the best data I have for persistence across the city goes back to pre-COVID times. And the number I have in my head for the average persistent rate of kids in college for 2 years is 35%. That's going back to a study in 2017. So that was pre-COVID. We're now above that after experiencing COVID. So I think that's a pretty good number, just because this has been really awful for college kids. So that's one measure. I think we'll get better data over time, but that to me is a relative bright spot. What you see is the communication with the class of 2021 being significantly higher than the class of 2020, even though the class of 2020 is okay. I think this just indicates we brought on someone to fill the academic success counselor, alumni success counselor role this past spring. And so she was able to build relationships with kids and then maintain that contact. These relationships matter beyond high school. So that's kind of not a learning moment for us, but just a reinforcement of like that matters. Regarding challenges, college enrollment across all demographic groups are down since 2019. Not surprising. Among students who identify as Black, the rate or the reduction is 22%. So it's a big number. Right now, our alumni success counselor is going on leave, so it just puts a bit of a challenge as she won't be around for 2 months, but we do have a plan for coverage there. And then I just say finally, we do have a critical mass of kids who are career driven right now. They want to work. And so while we're helping them out and have some like fledgling programs and partnerships in play, it's still young and we don't have anything formal in the same way we do with sort of college admissions support. So I see that being an avenue of interest. And I think more so now post-COVID, as there's more of an interest in kind of working among kids than before COVID. And I think there's some really good jobs out there for kids. As an example, we 2 kids recently who are taking part or who were enrolled, who are accepted into job training programs. One wants to be a welder and is going to be going to school in Texas. The other will be going to school here in New York as a carpenter. So these are good jobs. So I want to support them so that they're able to see those through. Next steps for us, I think that includes just continuing to actively provide support to our alumni and monitor their whereabouts, their needs for additional support. We've got this coverage plan now for the counselor who will be out on leave. So just seeing that through with fidelity, and then extending and maturing some of these fledgling partnerships we have on the career front. So that's where things stand right now in the world of alumni success at Unity. Are there any questions or insights, any ideas people have? Maybe a terrific program that you're aware of or know of that would take us in as a partner, make our work especially good? I've got one lead in the Navy Yard, so I want to seek that out. That's coming from Earl and another school leader in the area. So that may be something we talk about again in the near future.
Let me think about it. I wonder if the building trades might have ideas.
Yeah, please do. Cool. So that is alumni work. Let's move on. Let's talk a bit more about mock. I think it's good to get some context here. So I'm going to go down to, we can perhaps do this a bit more quickly than we did with the SLC call, but I think it's good to have some sense of a background to.
Can I just back up for 1 second? I think, sorry, I was on mute. For me, I mean, we talk about college a lot, and that's great, but the trades is also really critical. Like in terms of if somebody comes out of Unity, they should either go to school or have a job. Those are both great outcomes.
Yeah.
And we don't, and I'm just sort of, thinking out loud here. I don't know that we have enough contacts in that sort of world, in terms of like, maybe you don't want to go to college, or you go to college for a year or two and then you go into the trades, both of which actually work out very well long-term. It's a decision the kids make. And so are there programs, and maybe this is what you just asked, that help these kids who college just isn't for them? And
You went up there, Jake, Jim, for a second.
I'm just my internet is unstable. So are there groups out there or people that we should be more affiliating with for those folks who, maybe college isn't right for them, or maybe 2 years is right for them, and then move on to something else that we could be working with?
Yeah, I mean, that is the ask. I know of one group in the Navy Yard. They cater right now only to district schools. We've got 8 high schools who they work with. So I'd love to find a path or way in which we introduce ourselves and as a charter maybe get involved. We're all serving the same communities. So that would be great. And there may be others. I think this is a good conversation to have, I think, as a board too, and as a school. So I think for us, we want for our students to experience all doors open and have all the opportunities to then make a decision that's best for them at any point in time. And so maybe college, or it may not be. We'd like to have those both available to kids. In thinking about our first 2 years, there is a sub sample of students, and it might be, maybe it's 10 to 20% of our kids where like there's a career training program that could be really good for them. And so we want to make sure that it is and sort of help them along there. And that's a really good outcome for kids, as you said. And so I think that would be the vision, is for that critical mass of students having something formal set up. And then, that starts with perhaps internships in 10th and 11th grade, and then with formal kind of programming leading into or just following graduation. So a new terrain for us, but I think one that's worthy of advancement. So
this is Earl. I wasn't going to say anything, but the space that I'm in, 80% of the people in the space that I am don't have degrees. And it's agnostic of, quote unquote, where they come from or the school that they went to. A UI UX engineer is the person who designs the interface that you and I use on our iPhones or on our websites. It, at best, is a certification. project manager certification, which is a PMP. That's all it is. So several hours in a course, but it's not a degree.
Mm-hmm.
I have 7 project managers who work for me. 4 of them are from India. They didn't go to school. They've been in technology for years though. UI UX engineers who are designing the Jimmy Choo website, there's 5 of them. None of them went to college.
So in your mind here, like you're advocating, I mean, this career programming, like the more work we can do on behalf of kids, if that's their interest, the better.
I think if you take a litmus test of, all right, let's look at the top 5, top 10, top 20 careers out there. I mean, there's some pretty successful people, i.e. the same person that brought us Facebook that I would assume all of us are on. He dropped out of school. He didn't go to a school wasn't a particular audience. Mm-hmm. Steve Jobs is one of the smartest men I've ever did any research or studied on. He said he didn't like school. So I think if we're truly going to do our audience, our constituents, justice, I think we look at, not everyone wants to be a doctor and a lawyer. That's okay. My sister's a lawyer. My aunt got her PhD. My mom is working on this, and that's okay. But there's some people doing a whole lot of great things. General contractors, just that, a general contractor. But we all have homes. A general contractor built our house, and you don't have to have a degree. Mm-hmm. And there are millionaires all over this city that we live in that build sky rises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to that point, I got to hang out with about 10 alumni from the class of 2020 2 weeks ago. And 3 of them, they're friends. They're all involved in the same automotive certification program and working with Cadillac right now, and pretty fired up about it. And they're doing all right. So yeah, there's an interest among kids to get out there and make some money and make fairly good money doing it. And so I think the more we can do to kind of steer them and kind of expose them to different things that may pique their interest, the better. And so, again, going back to the mission moment, we may have some chefs in the future that are doing the work they're doing someday because of their experience in our club and MoFab.
Yeah, I think I'd appreciate that. I think the only thing that I'm trying to, and hopefully it conveys to my peers, is that you may spur someone who wants to go to 4-year college, say, you know what, I can actually become a web developer and or a contractor. I want to build homes for my life, and I don't necessarily want to go to architectural school. I can actually get my GC license, and an architect will come work for me. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's just the fact that, well, for the folks who may not like college and the folks who only want to do 2 years, I think it's having a broader stroke on what are the industries that are most appealing for millennials and beyond, and finding ways to bridge gaps for them.
Right on, 100%. I guess just to close here, 2 thoughts. One, I love the idea of like sort of like having our thing, like what are our niche fields that we're really good at and helping kids find and land really good jobs in. And so maybe there's a handful at some point in time in the future if we build this out right, but we go deep and do those well. And then the other point I'd make is I was in contact with a school leader just last week, and we were having a conversation about their experiences with a board. And this is a very sort of like college prep driven school. Like that's just what they do. And in their board conversation, there was not a whole lot of appetite for supporting kids who aren't doing that, who aren't going to college. And so it's good to hear from people here tonight that we're on the same page about like careers are really terrific for kids. And so we should support that too.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, but I do think there's like, I feel like there's some balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think on average, I still think probably most kids will have longer lifetime average earnings by going to college. Although obviously it's
the facts.
And there's no downside to preparing them for college. And if they make a different decision, we should be there to facilitate that. But there's absolutely no downside to the current game plan. You know,
100%.
it's
But I think
just for
in
these,
some sense,
yeah.
the action steps, I think Josh had the right action steps, just try to pick a few things that we can be a little bit deep on that maybe leverage off of resources in New York.
Yes.
And I like Earl's idea of UX stuff. I think I've seen that in my job. And I think also the building trades in New York makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So let's move things forward now. I'm going to hand things off to Melissa, and we're going to say a bit more about mock exam results and kind of what we're doing over the course of this past month, what we're doing next month. So Melissa, I'll hand things to you if I can get to the right slide here. Let's start.
Yeah. Jake kind of kicked us off with this a little bit earlier, where we have two big data points, especially for the middle school right now that we're thinking about. And we'll talk about the little data points we're gathering with more regularity after this. So we looked at the STAR exams, which are beautiful because they're so efficient and multi-purpose. They allow us to collect information about student growth over time in the short term and in the long term. And they do a good deal of predictability. So I put that study in here. It looks like they are, I think, 87% predictive generally. 87% of the time they correctly predicted how a student would do on the exam. It might have been 83. I'm trying to remember now, but incredibly predictive. So we've seen that data. We're going to dive now into our mock examinations. Those are internally created using released examinations and internally administered. So we want to start by just grounding in some historic performance. Students have not taken these exams since 2019. They're taken at the end of March, and it was 2 years ago today that we started this transition to quarantine. So the last time we have data from is 2019. And here what you see is our performance across years compared to District 13, where we're charted, in District 16, where many of our students reside. So in 2019, when we last took, this is the actual exam, we were looking at a 36% proficiency rate. That was trailing slightly our district, the district where we reside, had 39%. So we were setting our goal at 42%, which would be a goal that outperformed that district and showed a good amount of growth for us when we were hoping to take this in 2019. So what we have here is the last time we took mock examinations in this format. So in 2020, right before we left for remote school, we did administer mock examinations. And this is the percent proficiency by grade level and overall compared to our goals. So overall as a school, the last time we took mock examinations in very similar conditions of exam, so same length, same style passages in many cases, it might even be some of the same exam. We were looking at a projected 43% proficiency rate on the ELA exam. And then this shows the projected proficiency for students with disabilities, our mock results compared to our goal, which is 15. And again, overall, we were outperforming. We were projected to outperform. Questions on where we're coming from. So this year, we once again gave our mock examinations. And what we have here is all of the data points we have in front of us right now. Blue represents our mock examinations in each grade level. Orange represents STAR, and gray represents our goal. Clarifying questions here? We have the same information cut here for mock, STAR, and goal for students with disabilities. 15% being our goal. This is the actual performance. So these results look very different than the last time we took mock examinations. There is a context that we're taking this in. One is COVID. Students have been learning in a very different way. The word learning loss has been used a lot. Certainly, learning the style of a sit-down on-demand test has been very different than what students have been doing for the last 2 years. That affects stamina. So students really, especially at our middle school, well, at both our middle and high school level, have really not taken long form sit down exams in a period of time in many years. Some context is around cut scores. We are projecting here using what we know about cut scores from the exams we created these interim assessments from. It is possible that the cut scores will look a bit different this year for the city. If the cut scores are more generous this year for kids, then this number might look very different. Though we are operating with the cut scores and with the exam style questions that existed in the past. So we're imagining that if we transported this set of kids in these conditions back to 2020 and the exam was given, or 2019, that's what this is how it would look. One other piece of information, we have a number of staff who are new to Unity, including our department chair, who is both creating and driving the exams. So this is some context for our data as well. Any questions there? So obviously our data there shows that we're in need of some intervening, and here is what we're doing. We've shifted our curriculum right now to test as genre units. So students are spending a lot of time engaging in the kind of reading and writing tasks that are reflected on the exam. So a variety of actual genres across time, shorter pieces with multiple choice, lots of opportunities to do writing in the style of the examinations. There is regular after-school tutoring in place with our faculty who are doing some extra work and are being remunerated for that in order to get kids who need a little bit more support ready. And we're doing weekly assessment cycles that we are monitoring with regularity. So a director of special projects, who was formerly the principal of the middle school, is supporting with the data analysis and reporting on the regular, which gives the ELA department chair and the teachers time to act on the data. So the ELA department chair is using that data to create more individualized student supports and teacher coaching plans. We're also doing just some joy-based motivation, not having taken tests in a long time and then all of a sudden being very interested in test scores can be hard on kids. I got to the middle school on Monday, which was a joy because I've been really located at the high school this calendar year so far. There's everything from ordering t-shirts for test prep to countdowns in the hallways to sort of like pep rally feel events going on, celebrations of student success, names up on the wall, etc. So there's some of that in vibe as well. And then, so lingering on ELA, any questions? So Josh, yeah, go ahead.
Can I give this? Is maybe, I don't know if this is exactly opportune, but just to maybe, in my opinion, cut to the chase a little.
Mm-hmm.
To me, overall, I think what happened is probably Unity will do okay when it comes to the state exams, because probably all schools are in a similar position because they A, had learning loss last year due to remote stuff, and B, didn't take state tests last year and didn't do as much state test prep. Still, I do think this is to some extent validates the board's concern that we, last year that we should have been a little bit more focused on the test and, opting kids into the test last year, and just a little bit more focused on test prep in general. And so to sort of to bring together our different conversations for the night, I know we're also going to talk about expansion, and I think that is a good goal, and I think probably a good way of advancing how much we can improve on kids' sort of educational performance. But to me, the other piece of it is I think we have to take the tests as a little bit more a serious sort of point of accountability for you know, you all for the teachers, and then basically for us for the school, us being the board, I guess.
You know, I think I like that. I think we're a C at best with regard to using data to drive our instruction right now on the regular over the course of the year. And I think there are lots of opportunities to not just do a prep unit of study for a month, but think about the way in which we routinely circle back and engage kids in each unit of study over the course of the year. So that's where my head goes with regard to what we do moving forward to have growth accelerate, which then will be reflected in higher proficiency levels overall. I mean, the use of STAR right now is helpful in that way. I think about this summer, I think about reading interventions right now in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and us needing to double down on that and offer more of that over the course of the summer. That requires resources, but it's really good as a way to use resources in impacting kids. And so I also think with that STAR data, we're able to get some sense of like where there's the most movement progress wise and growth wise, and then ensuring that our kids are working under those conditions and with those teachers who seem to be promoting the most growth. So that's where my head goes with this data here. Perhaps the one area where I thought about this, perhaps the one area where we could debate a bit, Jake, is I think you're right with regard to stamina being a thing here. I think that and maybe I'm even underappreciating its impact here. We'll see. In thinking back to last spring, even if we had pushed it, we probably would have had maybe 50% of our kids in, and that's it. And so at that point in time, we made the decision that like that just wasn't going to be worth it, both from a like what it would provide and from a health standpoint at that point in time. So we didn't push it all that hard, and we ended up having 20 kids test instead, which was probably on average with what most schools had. So I just don't know if we could have done anything differently that would have, as of last spring, better prepare us now. I do think there's some things that we could have done. And maybe again, I'm being unreasonable because this fall was perhaps the hardest year I've ever experienced in school. But I think there's ways in which under normal conditions to create joyful, rigorous environments for kids to sort of be honored, particularly in the growth they show over the course of the year. And for us as adults to ensure that that's happening.
Yeah, and Josh, if we go back up to slide 18, we have a couple data points. None of the data points we have say that we're meeting the goals we want, and the goals that we were aspiring towards were set in pre-pandemic conditions. So there is a chance that we will do fine, and that will tell us a couple of things. It could tell us two things. One, it could tell us that our internal exams need some probing because they weren't predictive, or it could tell us that our test prep is very effective, wherein we might need to do some work around the rigor of instruction and authenticity of our instruction too. So I think if we had done straight test prep all year, we would have seen better scores here. But I want to make sure that we're looking at the acceleration of our learning too. One thing I did hear from our middle school team was we were looking at a couple of the teaching skills that we see, and our math department chair said, I feel like our math department has almost an unfair advantage over other teams right now. When we look at something like feedback in the moment in classrooms, of course, we're all doing it so regularly. It's test prep time. We're obsessed with the work that kids are creating. And I think creating that same vibe earlier is something the team is hungry for, even if the type of experiences that kids are having aren't necessarily like a quick passage with 10 multiple choice questions following it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Just one thing you said in terms of like what happens if we end up doing reasonably or better than these mock exams indicate. Couldn't that also just be that this is a somewhat curved exam and most schools are in your situation? Or am I wrong about my understanding of the state test?
The state test is curved. Our mock exam is curved in the way of the state test. So when we design that, we create curves that match.
Your curve is from a pre-COVID standard.
Yeah.
from a
So I'm saying
pre-COVID
like
exam.
so I'm saying, but if there's just been like overall learning loss, and then not to use the buzzword, but just like, then I think we'll, we might still curve
Yeah.
out to the same place, but it's still not a great indication for us as a school.
Yeah, there's a question of, even with the curve, how do we do relative other schools? But
Yeah.
I think that cut score thing is real. The cut score will not be the same as what it was 2 years ago. Or
Yeah.
it was 3 years ago that we were basing the score, actually this cut score on. So.
And we will see. We should not operate under the assumption that the city will lower or the state will lower the bar. We should operate as if we're looking for that same level of performance that we were looking for in 2020.
But just to go back to the not taking the exams last year, to some degree, I don't care so much about whether we took it or not, but I guess I'd take it as somewhat indicative of the overall sort of focus on state exams. And I am mindful of the fact that if I had to guess, the two of you are probably within the unity spectrum, are probably more on the spectrum of being pro exams than everybody that you're dealing with sort of as who sort of work for you. Just if I had to project my views about the teacher body, and also I guess the institutional dynamic. But I do think that I guess I do think that that's one place where we're not serving Unity's interest the best, of having a more test focus. And I don't think, we don't need to turn into one of these schools that's sort of trying to get, beat Scarsdale in their test scores every year. But I think if we could just, there's some low hanging fruit that we could just put some significant buffer between us and the district schools. It will give us a lot more flexibility to feel like, we can, that we're really serving these kids at least significantly better than district schools on the basics. And then I guess at least me as a board member will feel more comfortable embracing some of the other holistic stuff.
I think that I like that. I think so. I think that's fair. I think it's true being a leader where you have output related sort of measures in place. Usually the managers are more fired up about that than those who are, doing the work on the ground. So I think it's fair. I think where I get to where no one is going to disagree with us from the full team is like growth matters. And because growth is directly connected to proficiency, as long as we're delivering consistent yearly growth, like kids will be well served, and like everyone will nod to that. Like no one wants to sort of not serve kids well and see them sort of learn effectively and demonstrably over the course of a year under their supervision. And so that's the way that I tend to sort of like then convey it, so that everyone is saying, all right, yeah, no, you're right. Every one of our kids should grow under our watch each and every year. And again, like with that, like proficiency is just the result.
But I think there's something else there. It's the fact of testing, the fact of putting, can they handle the pressure, which is what we all do at our jobs every day, and being able to recall and think under a 3-hour time constraint or whatever. I think that's a valuable thing to learn. And I hate testing. I'll never take a test again. But maybe I think during COVID they lost some of that, the ability to keep your head under that kind of pressure and be clear. Which is, you got to learn that. So that's something you got to learn if you're going to go anywhere in life. Yeah. People poo-poo testing and they give it a bad name, and a lot of times for good reason. But there is something to training people, these kids, to sit down and focus and be under pressure and not lose it and just absolutely dial it in. And I think maybe some of that is coming through here, where that muscle just got weak over the last year or two.
Yeah, I think Jake actually used the term muscle too. And then Madonna on Wednesday during the SLC call, kind of compared preparation for state exams to not like a sprint at the end where you kind of go hard for a month and a half, which just isn't good for kids. But it's a marathon, and like, see, you got to do this over the course of the year gradually, so that there's healthy sort of drive, healthy effort, it's sustainable, it's injury free, all those things happen. And so I think those are the moves that we can make in the near future, in kind of building in more intention over the course of the fall to winter than what was experienced this year. And again, I'd say this was a tough year, but there's still ways in which we could grow, even if this year wasn't or hadn't been as sort of difficult or challenging because of things outside our control. I think the final bit here, we're speaking the same language. Just as an example, we're giving mock exams next week at the high school. They will be like they'll be multi-hour exams, just like the N line, whether it's an AP exam or Regents exam. And that was a bit of a debate at the high school to make that happen. And Melissa held firm. And so we'll see if that translates by kids having kind of an earlier rep, whether that kind of like translates into kids having an easier time showing off their very best stuff on what is a pretty taxing experience exam was.
And I will say, to our high schoolers' credit, year over year, students choose at a very high rate to take the exam that comes with the extra 3.5-hour test or take the course. Like many students opt in, right? We don't screen in. We allow students to opt into our AP tests, and they will take those more challenging courses when given the choice. More often than not, students choose those. So I think that I'm hoping that this is a short-term dip, and we'll see if that trend continues with this group who has been entered high school while in the pandemic as well. And then we will have the benefit that we haven't had since 2019 of being able to compare our mock performance to how students do on this actual exam to our historic performance. So it'll be a big summer for seeing what's working and what's changed.
Now, the conversation we've just had, we dug more deeply in the ELA. The conversation we're having, and I think the story for ELA can be carried over to math. So I don't think we have to kind of go into math with the same level of detail. It's in the monthly report and then also on these SLC slides, unless folks feel otherwise.
I heard forward thinking, considering how we're looking at this data throughout the year beyond the interim assessments that we are doing. I'm hearing be very attentive to what happens when we take these actual exams. Does anyone have any other advice for us as we move into these last weeks of preparation at the middle school, our last round of mock examinations at the high school before early May APs and mid-June region?
So I just had a question on how the data from the mocks are going to be used, especially with the state exams being right around the corner for the middle school. Regents, they have more time, of course, but exactly what was going to happen with the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we can, you want me to take, I can take this, Melissa, and you can add in.
Yeah.
So I think
I'll first say though, these were taken a couple weeks ago. So this is the wrapped up data, and it was being taken during our last meeting. So folks have begun acting on it in the way that Josh is about to tell you.
So we've got student level data going back to how kids did on the fall STAR exam. We've got winter STAR exam data. We've got mock data. And then we have attendance data. So attendance is also important to look at in terms of like, okay, what sort of intervention is best? If a student has low attendance and is not perhaps performing well on these assessments, let's first kind of focus on the attendance and making that constant before then kind of moving into helping the student with reading and writing. That happens at the same time, but we've got to get kids in school to have that happen. So we have all that data sort of mapped out. And then what we did is using the cut scores from the mock, we've subdivided kids into 3 or 4 groups and on a 1 through 4 scale, roughly in the same way that STAR does. And so for those students who demonstrated proficiency on the mock and on STAR, they're in good form. So it's like, stay the course. Let's just keep kind of having these kids practice. If we see kind of areas of misconception, let's address them, but these kids are in good form. For kids who are below the cut or well below the cut, those are our groups that are receiving tutoring or are receiving small group interventions during the day. Some of those kids have pull-out sort of services for reading skills or math skills with math interventions, and so those are the things happening more intensively for those students on a weekly basis right now. We talked about these sort of assessment cycles, and so we are assessing kids on the standards that matter most over the course of the week. So a teach in a different way of like some very key concept that kids will be tested on it's important for them to develop for that grade. And then we will grade them. And then from there, assess like where there's been growth, where there has not been since the mock, since the prior STAR exam, et cetera. And then based on kids, what kids demonstrate and what they don't demonstrate, there's in-class intervention, or perhaps that's happening in tutoring, in which we know on a given standard how a kid did and where they demonstrated that they understood something and didn't, and then during those settings are able to quickly intervene. So there are quick feedback loops happening, and that's, again, I think there are 4 of them in ELA, and there'll be more in math because the math exam is in late April. But that's the way we're approaching this now, and I think it's solid. Again, going back to what we were discussing earlier, I'd like to do that more rigorously over the course of the year and not have it be just something we do a month out or a month and a half out before the final exam moving forward. Madonna, does that answer your question, and any follow-up?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you. Yeah, it does.
And does that seem familiar to you or appropriate, or would you add anything or offer any input?
It does. So I'm also just thinking in terms of because this sounds like school wide, right? So I'm thinking in terms of in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
how are teachers continuously taking data? How are they engaging in prep? Are they using strategies like stations to have data-driven stations where they're targeting specific student gaps and looking at student data daily and then doing reteaches based on that for more smaller groups and individual students, kind of building on focusing more not just only on those priority standards, but just individually where students are experiencing gaps.
Yeah, so there's strategic grouping happening in each class, and we talked about the weekly cycles that we're now going through. Now, those weekly cycles are not, they're not the same as a multi-day testing, right? They would be more distinct skills or shorter amounts of synthesized skills. So, but we've got an eye on those weekly, and teachers are making instructional shifts based on that weekly collection of data. They're doing in-the-moment collection of data in class as a focus for the entire faculty, the in-the-moment feedback. We saw a great math class on Tuesday where kids were in centers. And then regular use of in-the-moment feedback, weekly feedback cycles, flexible groupings, and other strategies in class, as well as the task. The students are doing a lot of test genre work, all happening.
Maybe one question. I posed it as a statement before, but I'll repose it as a question. And I think everything that Madonna said seems right to me. Like, do it earlier, and it's sort of a whole year focus kind of thing. Do you think that there's a cultural resistance at all among the faculty to sort of a perception of tests being a central feature of school, or is that, or am I basically, or is that am I off in that presumption?
One of the interview questions we pose out for each educator who we hire or don't hire relates to that question. How do you feel about state exams? Do they serve a purpose? And if so, what is it? And we want to know that people aren't adverse to the reality of what assessments kind of mean for school, where they serve a purpose, their value, et cetera, knowing that they're also, hard. And so I think the answer to your question in a nutshell is I don't feel that pressure. I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago I did. I'm like, oh my gosh, like we've got some culture work to do with regard to people buying into like the importance of, kids being able to show off their best stuff and us being responsible for that. I don't feel that that's the case now, not at all.
Yeah. Now that I'm
curiosity, when you ask that question, when people say they're valuable, why do they say that testing is valuable?
They say it's valuable because it holds schools accountable for ensuring they're taking care of kids and preparing them skill-wise for, if it's middle school, high school readiness, if it's high school, college readiness.
Do they see any benefit to the student in terms of being able to, learn something and get it right when asked a question about it? Or is it more what you described?
I think
is it just like a negative for the student and something the student has to go through? There's no real positives there.
I think more of the former. Go ahead, though, Melissa.
Yeah, it's more of the former, though. I think that folks will recognize that it can open doors for students. So an AP exam can open doors for students. An exam for certification opens doors for students, so that there are some tangible, real benefits. I had a couple conversations with my ELA team at the high school now that I'm working with them directly. One of our strong teachers, Jacob Lazar, has said, I fear a world where we skew away from testing. Abby Strelli, who does not love tests, is talked about how she's excited for these regions because she thinks she's grown as a teacher and she can see students growing, and that she knows that opens doors for them. And at the high school, there's an attitude, it's necessary for graduation. So I think that folks definitely see very tangible utility that they will not deny. That being said, as a high school leader, I would like to do a little bit less testing and a little bit more long form writing, for example, research. And I think we can all think of the hours we've spent researching and writing papers. That was also grueling, rigorous. That's a little bit different than a pen to paper exam. And sometimes that bucket gets, we take from that bucket to put into test taking. So I think that there are some, realistic viewpoints around that as well.
Okay, thanks.
You do not have to demonstrate the ability to do any long form writing, research, and turn something in New York State, but you do have to pass these exams. So there are complexities.
Josh, where do you want to go from here? Do you want to?
I think we're
running.
Yeah, let's go over
overtime here. You want to
2 quick items to approve. Those are minutes from the last.
Let's do this quickly. We can hop over into executive and talk about some of the other stuff.
Yep.
Okay, the first item to approve is the minutes from the meeting of January 18, 2022. Are there any questions regarding the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Show your hands. Okay, thank you. I like my daughters. That's a good one. Okay. Second item, minutes from the meeting on February 15, 2022. All in favor? Thank you. Any members of the public to comment? Sal, I see a child there. Any comments there?
Any debate? What's
one
member of the public?
He seems concerned, but I think he's fine.
Okay.
Any views on state exams?
He's going to keep him to himself.
Okay, next thing, board assessment preview next meeting. Josh, anything you want to say about next meeting? I think I'll say one thing. I think we do need to get going on a 5-year budget and really dig into that soon. And I'd like to be included on that.
April, so there may be a draft of our 22-23 budget, which could then also be aligned with a 5-year budget by the next meeting. We'll sort of see where that goes, but we've done that in the past. And so I see that being
Yep.
in the cards, in addition to some mock results, perhaps coming from the high school. We'll see if those will be ready
Okay.
to share out or not.
Great. Okay, anybody else before we go to executive session?